There are some verses which are disputed. Let's take a classic one. Timothy's there. He who was manifested in the flesh. Some translations have God was manifested in the flesh. That's almost certainly a corruption. You can find that information very easily online, I suppose. You may not want to own the textual criticism book that scholars use all the time, showing the relative certainty of certain disputed verses. But that's a very clear one. Any commentary, and you've got a mass of commentaries online now, they will tell you that that's been corrupted. It doesn't say God was manifested in the flesh. It says he who was manifested in the flesh, meaning Jesus. And the difference in Greek is fascinating between he who, os, O-S, and God, which would be T-H-E-O-S. It's very easy to corrupt that by some clever scribal tricks of the trade. They can simply put a line through that th in Greek, which is a theta. You put a line through it, and it turns the os into theos, recognized as a corruption. The devil is very, very active, and you do need access to some good commentaries, but they're mostly online these days. All of these issues, type them in, and you'll find good information. So that's a classic example of a corruption and should be read not in the King James, but in a modern version. I recommend the New American Standard Updated Version. I don't recommend the NIV as much because it tends to be very Trinitarian. For example, the NIV says that Jesus said that he went back to the Father. He never said that. If you've got a Bible that says that Jesus said, I'm going back to the Father, you're being taken for a ride, to put it mildly. He didn't go back to the Father. They hadn't been with the Father yet. So there are tricks of the trade, but the vast majority of all the Bibles available give you the good sense of the truth. They really will. 98%, I venture to say, of all good translations, paraphrases, will give you the right sense. Some of them are a little bit more accurate, less liable to fall down than others. King James is old, not based on the best manuscripts even, and very foggy. Now, if it's your favorite Bible and you can't bear any other, that's one thing. It's your choice. But I want to warn you, the King James is not the best way to read Scripture. Use the RSV, NRSV, or even the NAB, the Roman Catholic Bible done by scholars, Roman Catholics, and others. Very good translation, reads very well. But avoid the King James Version, which is rather antique and old and foggy, especially for your children.
Yeah, and I would recommend, Anthony, this book, Bart Ehrman's The Orthodox Corruption of Scripture, Fact of Early Christological Controversy.
Good point.
The text of the New Testament. We obviously, when we recommend books, especially from former Trinitarians, Ehrman has now come out as a so-called agnostic, someone who doesn't know what's there or what's what. But he did start out as a fundamentalist Christian, I believe.
Yeah.
And he wrote this book and published it back in 1993. And it's a very interesting collection of manuscript evidence, all the known corruptions that affected Christology, the study of Christ. If you want to know how to, in debate, engage Trinitarians have actually done the heavy lifting for us.
They have.
With books like this. So they have found, guess what? So we have to remember that what we call the New Testament, collections of letters or books that were written almost 2,000 years ago. We do not have so-called originals. So what we have are copies of copies of copies. For example, the Gospel of Mark was copied thousands of times, thousands of copies of the Gospel of Mark. People like Bart Ehrman, who are called textual critics or textual scholars, they spend their life collecting all these manuscripts, studying them, reading them, and seeing if there are any substantial differences. Now, the substantial differences, case of Ehrman, he found out that there were Orthodox corruptions as the type that was described by Sir Anthony. For example, in 1 Timothy 3:16, Ehrman found that copyists, people who copied this text, made subtle changes through the years, through the centuries maybe, because they believed in this case that Jesus was God in the flesh. They changed the text.
Classic corruption in the King James Version is 1 John 5:7, which speaks of 3 and 1, sounds like a Trinitarian verse, it's a complete forgery. And it is not in any of our modern versions at all. It's just simply been taken out of all modern translations. But it's a blatant corruption, a blatant imposition of the Trinity upon the text, found still in the King James Version. It's called the Johannine Comma, and it shouldn't be there. In fact, it dates to centuries after the time of Jesus. It's an effort to force the doctrine of the Trinity upon innocent, unsuspecting readers. So if you're just using a King James, wipe out that 1 John 5:7. It doesn't belong there. All modern translations and commentaries will explain that. There's no argument about it at all. It's simply a contradiction of what was written in the inspired text of Scripture.
Yep, the infamous Johannine Comma. Yeah, you're talking 1000 AD.
Right.
Someone went and dug up a made up.
Right.
The copy you see there, by the way.
Yes.
Was made up. Made up in the earliest maybe 1000 AD, the latest 12th century, and they said, "Here you go. There's the Trinity."
Yep.
So